Hello, name is Dr. Lawrence Yang. Today, the title of my talk is Global Mental Health and Stigma, Advancing Science by Reaching the Most Vulnerable Groups with Psychosis. It is with some disbelief that I'm actually accepting this award today. I want to really acknowledge with great gratitude BBRF for recognizing and then supporting this work. I do wish, of course, that we were able to give this talk in person, but we will just have to do the best we can in the current circumstances. So just a note on how I got started in this work. First of all, I've been examining for a long time the factors that influence course of psychosis and schizophrenia. I've had two main areas of interest throughout my career. This includes stigma of psychosis, global mental health, and field work, with a focus on field work in China. And my training is interdisciplinary. My core training is in clinical psychology. I also have rigorous training in anthropology and epidemiology. So today I'll be speaking about two distinct topics. However, they are bound together by the fact that they are two very vulnerable groups in different stages of psychosis. So the first is that of the stigma of the clinical high-risk state for psychosis, abbreviated as CHR. This work was actually supported by BBRF. I was fortunate enough to receive the Young Investigator Award. It was my first major grant in my entire career. It facilitated my then getting awarded an R01 grant to study this topic that I will be talking about today. And so in this group, this very vulnerable group, it's youth in the United States who are suffering at the earliest stages of psychosis. The second topic is examining cognition among an untreated cohort of individuals with psychosis in China. These are folks who are chronic and untreated. I will be talking about two different R01 grants, one that we are in the midst of completing, and then a second follow-up grant. I again just want to highlight that BBRF has such a profound impact on my career. It led, this Young Investigator Award led to the first R01, and then having that first R01 really enabled me then to further expand my work into this new area. So for the first topic, the clinical high-risk state for psychosis, or the CHR, this is a newly developed category and it identifies youth from 12 to 25 years old who may develop psychosis. So approximately 29% of youth identified with these clinical signs may then transition over into a full psychotic disorder within 2 years. So this is a high-risk symptom state that precedes a full episode of psychosis. It is distinct from when a person actually develops a first episode of psychosis. And the distinctive feature of CHR is that the youth maintain insight into their odd symptoms and experiences. And this insight, unfortunately, disappears when the first episode of psychosis occurs. So there have been treatment strategies developed for identifying and then treating youth in these earliest stages. I also want to say that I am firmly an advocate for this early identification state. I do believe in it and its potentially transformative impacts to identify youth and hopefully potentially mitigate and potentially forestall psychosis, development of psychosis. To the extent that there are any risks associated with this identification state, we should identify them and then mitigate them. So one major risk is that of stigma, because if there are 29% of the youth may go on to develop psychosis, well, that actually leaves more than 70% of the youth who will not go on to develop psychosis. But the thing is that they've been identified as at clinical high-risk state for psychosis. So what impact does that have on their sense of self, their identity? And so stigma has been identified as a salient issue. The impact of stigma on the implementation of CHR services, which again are proliferating around the United States, can be quite powerful. First of all, it may keep youth from coming in to using these early treatment services when they are available, becoming more and more available. And then secondly, even if youth do come in, will they adhere as fully as they should? So in order to illuminate some of these dynamics, we completed a 5-year study in 3 sites at Harvard, Maine, and Columbia. The site PIs at the time include Larry Seidman and Dr. Bill McFarland. I'm also joined by an incredible investigative team, senior Stigma mentor Bruce Link, as well as tremendous collaborators Cheryl Corcoran, Roger Gerges, Kristen Woodbury. So I'm going to just be giving you a brief summary of some of the main findings we've had to this point. We continue to produce findings in this important area, and so more will be coming. But the first aim is around to what extent are youth most impacted by psychosis, being at risk for psychosis or schizophrenia versus a non-psychotic disorder. So what we sought to investigate here was that the naturalistic beliefs that youth hold when they enter into a CHR service, what are they most concerned about? What do they feel is most impactful upon their identity? And so the common wisdom here, actually, what we're most concerned about, actually, is that they would be most concerned about their psychosis risk, right? Because that could have impacts upon how they think about themselves, and again, stigma. But very interestingly, and you'll see here on this main slide here, that the contrary is actually true. Contrary to expectations, youth actually, when they enter into these CHR services, are more impacted by their non-psychotic diagnoses, so depression and anxiety, and versus their psychotic-like experiences, psychosis, indicative of psychosis experiences, where about less than 30%, a significant minority, but less than 30% of youth endorse these as being the most impactful aspects of other symptomatology. So this actually helps us to think about and shift clinical practice to, what are the domains of symptomatology that youth themselves are most concerned about in terms of first engaging them. A second aim is around what is the emotional impact of identification. So these youth, in the first aim, right, came in, they have these naturalistic conceptions of, what is most troubling to them. Then they meet with a specialized CHR clinician who then explains to them that they're at risk for psychosis, what that means, that they might develop psychosis in the next 2 years, et cetera, what are the risks, how do you mitigate it, et cetera. So what we did here, in order to really examine the impacts of being told that you're at risk for psychosis by a specialized clinician, we evaluated the emotions before the feedback was given and then after. And we wanted to see were there changes, in the emotions that the youth endorsed. And thankfully, this is some good news, for the field, that you can see here on the red bars, the bolded bars are the pre-feedback interviews, and then the striped bars are the post-feedback interviews. And you can see here that post-feedback, the negative emotions decrease in every single negative emotion that we assessed. So in some, youth, after they were told that they're at risk for psychosis in these specialized centers, felt less embarrassed, less different, less angry, ashamed, sad, and worried. So this is overall, again, a really positive sign for the field in terms of not only are we not causing further harm in terms of the identification, at least in these measured aspects, we're actually mitigating negative emotions. I will note here, though, if you take a look at the blue bars on the right-hand side, we also looked at positive emotions, so being hopeful, relieved, etc. We're hoping that these would also increase after CHR identification. There's actually no change post-identification, so that's a area for future exploration and inquiry. So just to wrap up this first topic, in terms of implications for clinical care, youth reported being most impacted by non-psychotic condition labels naturalistically as they enter the service. So for instance, depression, anxiety symptoms, again, because they've had these types of issues in a more long-standing way, typically prior to entering the CHR service. So it's natural that these things would be the things that they're most preoccupied with. However, and this could shape, of course, clinical engagement in terms of CHR clinicians really being more attuned to perhaps really following the youth's lead in terms of what they're most concerned about. Secondly, our findings show that as youth are identified as being at CHR, that actually negative emotions are reduced. And so that's a tremendously positive, encouraging finding for the field. In terms of the actual identification, again, appears to mitigate some negative emotions that could be associated with being identified at CHR. So I'm now going to launch into the second part of my talk today. We're going to completely change context into the country of China, where I've done a lot of work. So let me start off by describing the 686 treatment program that's been happening in China for over a decade now, a landmark national program to identify individuals with psychosis. It's now covered over 60% of China. Over 4 million individuals with psychosis have been identified and referred into this treatment program. So it's the largest program of this kind in history. Scientifically, in addition to it being just a tremendous, humanitarian and treatment effort, it also provides a unique scientific opportunity, because as the long-term individuals are brought into treatment, we're able to actually do an assessment prior to them receiving treatment. So what it allows us to do is to gain an unprecedented view into what the natural course of psychosis looks like. And the fact that this study exists enables us to do so in an ethical manner. So the focus of this second part is around cognition. And so cognition you can think of as different components that, or abilities that underlie cognition and thinking. So for instance, problem solving, processing speed, other cognitive capabilities like this. So this chart actually shows, we're comparing healthy controls versus people with schizophrenia. So as you can see, on the y-axis we have cognitive ability, on the x-axis it is adult age, and the healthy controls are signified by the dashed line. Regrettably, as we all age, there's somewhat of a decline in cognition as we age. For people with schizophrenia, you can see here in the orange line, even before they get sick, they start off lower in cognition. During the clinical high-risk period, which I described earlier, there's a more rapid decline in cognition. At first episode psychosis onset, there's the most severe drop in cognition, as signified by the arrow. Then afterwards, as schizophrenia becomes chronic into adult age and into older age, the best of our understanding is that most of the studies show stabilization at this point. So basically, cognition does not continue to deteriorate, but it levels off. So there is one big caveat, though, in that nearly all of the studies of people with chronic schizophrenia are actually treated, because in high-income countries, as soon as people are identified, well, obviously you want to treat them, get them into, start them on medication, which can help control their symptoms. This, of course, then alters the pathophysiology of the illness. So this is our current, state of our current wisdom, and our study sought to illuminate this further. What we had the opportunity to do was to study cognition of untreated psychosis. This is in the first China R1 that I'll be mentioning today. So this is a historic opportunity to illuminate the natural history of untreated psychosis in the community, and to compare this with a matched sample of treated individuals with psychosis and community normal. So our target is a 400 per group. We may not actually make it to 400, but we're at 250 now in each group, and hopefully we'll get to around 300 or so. And so, we're making good and steady progress on this study. I want to acknowledge the world-class study team that I'm a part of. You don't make it anywhere in your career unless you have, tremendous mentors, and I would count my mentors to be among the best. So in this top row here, you could see Michael Phillips, Dr. Ezra Susser with Columbia, long-term mentors of mine who I've worked with for decades. And honestly, I would not be here, where I am without their help, along with others as well. Dr. Jeff Lieberman, of course, at Columbia, Child Psychiatry at Columbia, tremendous asset to our team. At Harvard, we have Dr. Mitra Keshavan, Dr. Bill Stone, who's our cognition expert, and Dr. Larry Seidman, who passed away several years ago and really just left us too soon. But I know, Larry, you'd be delighted and thrilled by the work that I'll be talking about today. So I hope that somewhere you're looking down on us and smiling on us. So Ningxia province, where we're working, is in western China. It's a remote province, and it's a largely desert province. And if you look at the other side of my slide, Yinchuan is the capital city within Ningxia province. And so you fly into there, it takes about 30 hours. In order to locate the people with untreated psychosis, Michael's team, all credit to Michael, really, and his team, are scouring the southern part of the province, which is more remote, and people are even less likely to be treated. So I'm going to bring you on a little tour just to give you a real in-depth view of what this world looks like. So on one of these trips, this is the beautiful countryside. The orange is actually the tea leaves. This is the southern part of the province, and we're traversing the mountains at this point. We then arrive at a village, and we're hiking around the mud and passing pigs, all this, anything. It's typical for a rural countryside. We finally locate the individual with psychosis. This individual lives actually in the traditional dwellings of this region, which are actually caves. So, so this is can be really remote China. This quite foreboding figure here who's looking down on us is actually the individual's mother. And actually, she's quite friendly, when we meet her. So, but this is is a really stark graphic, I would say. So we meet the individual with psychosis. She's in her mid-30s. She's here in green, and she's just come back from a day of working in the fields. She has a husband. She's doing pretty well. She has a husband. She has 2 adult kids who are no longer in the house. She's, she is curious about who we are. We're interacting pretty appropriately. I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, we came all this way, and this person, is going to screen out, on psychosis. This happens to Michael's team all the time. But during the clinical interview, we realized, she's been symptomatic for 12 years. She believes that the angels of the universe are telling her secrets. She's having these always hallucinations. She thinks that her neighbors have been poisoning her. This has been going on and off for the past 12 years. So clearly she meets the criteria for schizophrenia. When verifying her untreated status, the husband dutifully brings out the risperidone. You can see here that 12 years ago, they went to the nearest community clinic, which is several hours away, to get medication, but you can see here unopened. She never took any of the medication. So they took the medication, but she never actually took any of it. So she is untreated. Afterwards, one of Michael's really well-trained team members then is actually assessing this individual in the quietest locale possible. It happens to be in the courtyard. She actually does relatively well. I do want to say, not all untreated people with psychosis look like this individual. This person happens to be one of the higher functioning folks. But again, just want to walk you through one of these stories. Afterwards, the husband, you can see the husband here along with the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist is telling both the husband and the individual identified individual about there's going to be free medication treatment in a local village in several months' time. She's eligible for this. She's already been enrolled in it. It's up to her and the husband whether or not they want to participate. And I'll pick up on that in just a little bit. But this is a very important part of this of the study. Obviously, we really try to refer everybody possible and really encourage them to make use of this treatment. So let me jump to the main findings. This is DUP indicates duration of untreated psychosis. And when we started the study, we thought that we would get people who were maybe up to 5 years untreated, maybe up to 10 years untreated. Typically, studies go up until 5 years of untreated psychosis, and that's as far as basically studies go, because almost everybody gets identified and brought into treatment if they are going to seek treatment by then, at least in high-income settings. That's the big caveat. In this sample, you can see here that on average, we have about 200 individuals with untreated psychosis, and on average, untreated for over 23 years. So there's no other data set like this to our knowledge with such detailed measures of cognition. And so again, this offers just unprecedented view of what does cognition look like in the course of chronic untreated psychosis. And the main findings, so what we do is we actually provide the individuals with psychosis the matrix consensus cognitive battery. So the MCCB is the most widely used schizophrenia cognition battery. It's got, in our adapted version, we have 6 domains, cognitive domains that we're testing, and there are 8 separate tests. Each of the tests here is represented by one of the bars. I have all the negatively scaled bars here represented only just for ease of presentation. But here you can see, if you take a look, there are 3 orange bars out of the 8. Which this means is that in these 3 domains, which represent simple coding, which represent processing speed, reasoning and problem solving, and visual learning. In these 3 domains, as the untreated psychosis increases, there's a statistically significant decrease in each of these 3 domains. And this is some of the only evidence, some of the accumulating evidence showing that there could be progressive cognitive decline during the adult into older adult period. And our study is adding a very unique component to this accumulating set of evidence. So I'll show this here. So our data shows the possibility of changes or decreases in several cognitive tests with extended DUP, duration of untreated psychosis. And again, here it's signified by the dotted line here, going from adult age into older adulthood, that there could be a selective cognitive decreases in, again, selected aspects of cognition. This could signify select neurodegenerative processes later in life, and this is something that we're very excited to continue to explore with our data. So, in terms of the implications for these findings, well, number one, it could illuminate a different pathophysiology of the illness in adulthood and in later adulthood than we've understood prior, because the common wisdom is that basically most of the sort of harm that's been done to cognition occurs around the first episode of psychosis, and then it stabilizes afterwards. That then should be reflected in the neural and pathophysiological processes. However, again, if our findings hold, it raises the possibility again that there could be variable outcomes, including changes in cognition that are associated with aging that stretch out into adulthood and older adulthood, thus again potentially suggesting focal neurodegenerative type processes. And again, this is something we want to continue to look at. We have to, for instance, look at the rate of decline, cognitive decline, as participants age in the healthy control group and the treated group. Those are our next 2 steps, so we look forward to reporting on those in the very near future. If cognition does continue to decrease as people are age and remain untreated, it's quite possible, again, and we'll be looking at this, is there a greater risk for neurological disorders, so for instance, dementias? And you can imagine, in many of the world's untreated, chronically untreated people with psychosis are going to be in rural, low and middle income settings like China. And so this could be a significant global burden if folks then develop more severe cognitive impairments that might be associated with processes like dementia. So that could suggest that we need to identify and develop focal treatments to really preserve people's cognition as they age in settings like this. This last point here is that I noted earlier, we refer people to treatment, but not everybody accepts it, despite the sort of most pointed or optimistic, the most encouraging urgings by Michael's team. So about 50% of the people with psychosis actually do not accept treatment for whatever reason. And so this opens up another opportunity for us to look at, well, among the people who don't choose to take up treatment, what happens to their cognition, again, 2 years later, 3 years later. And again, Michael's team, again, really tries to get, within reason, tries to really hard to get them into these free services. But again, these folks have, choice essentially, and their families have choice whether or not to take up the treatment. And, a lot of times there are processes like inertia, logistics in terms of distance to the treatment center that keep individuals from participating. So we've embedded a study that will further enable us to examine the longitudinal course of cognition in these individuals. So, as a conclusion, I am again delighted to have the opportunity to speak about how I believe we've been able to advance science by reaching the most vulnerable groups with psychosis. In the first part of today's talk, I spoke about stigma among the earliest stages of psychosis among clinical high-risk youth in the United States. In the second talk, I spoke about cognition among chronic and untreated psychosis in a remote rural setting like China that we believe has implications for other low and middle income contexts. And again, I hope what I've illustrated with today's talk is that we've been able to advance knowledge within these local populations with, again, the intention of eventually developing specialized treatments for these vulnerable groups. But the scientific findings themselves, we believe, have implications for psychosis worldwide. So I want to conclude again with just the sincerest note of appreciation to BBRF that has really made this work possible for investigators like myself and for scores, hundreds of investigators around the world. Without this kind of support, we wouldn't be able to undertake this kind of work that can really have a meaningful impact on people with psychosis, their lives and the lives of their loved ones. So thank you again.